Until now, there have been several universal constants, and one of those constants I'm going to be talking about today is the fact that every single one of the 12 spacefaring races use but one weapon. One weapon. Everyone knows it is the one weapon, normally the one that you're born with, that you practice and train with, and you become the absolute expert so that you can, one, survive combat, and two, show off so that you can impress your mate. Well, this was a constant that was put to the test and thrown aside by a new race that was discovered. On the third planet of a sector we know now as Sol, this little blue green ball housed several billion of these small, squishy creatures that originally everyone thought would be too far out to deal with, but was too tempting a target for certain spacefaring races to look at as a potential either food source or slave source. So plans were drawn up, and the reptilian and semi insectoid looking Gareshtans decided that they would invade the planet. To accomplish this, they did something very sneaky. They simply waited until a natural field of asteroids and meteors went by, causing a dazzling light show if you were on the surface. And they hid behind these rocks as they sent their own pods into their own to the human atmosphere. Once on the ground, they were able to disembark and simply move out. It was believed, being such squishy little creatures, that they would most likely run away and could be easily wrangled up. It was to a first patrol's surprise as they came across one person outside around a wood burning stove as they boiled some sort of liquid. They looked strange at this creature. This creature heard them moving, heard them chattering to themselves, and looked over at them. Its eyes immediately widened and it stood up, immediately reaching for something on its side. They thought, well, it's our job to take these things, so maybe we can just scare it into running. And if, barring that, we can just do what we always do, master our appendages, and we will simply impale them. As the Karishkin's front forelimbs were very, very spike designed. Basically, if cut off, they would look a lot like a meter and a half long spear, without a spear head, of course. This would allow them to impale a target several times, pushing in and drawing out until the subject either died of shock or blood loss. To their surprise, as they originally raised their front forelimbs, the creature they were looking at drew something from its side, raised it, and then a sound echoed throughout the land. Several sounds, again and again and again. Several of the Zeritians covered their auditory sensors, as this sound was far greater than anything they expected. And then they saw two of their number fall. They seemed to flinch every time that the sound was made, but they were all flinching, so they didn't think anything of it. And then one fell, and then the one next to it fell. The sound continued to echo, and as they looked down to their comrades, they couldn't figure out what was going on. Then they looked up and saw that the device in that creature's hand dropped another piece of metallic to the ground, and another black piece of metallic was put in its place. And then it made a odd clicking sound, and then it was pointed back at them. So the Rishians, a little angry at the loss of their comrades, began to run down the hill at this animal as the sound echoed again and again and again, and one by one the enemy began to fall. However, this was not without the human backing up more and more and more as he fired, eventually loading another one of these metal pieces into the bottom of his weapon. It was then that the Zeritians realized this was their weapon. They had to get close. They had to immediately take it down as fast as possible. They didn't know what was really hitting them, but they did know it was lethal. So they immediately tried to charge. The human ran as fast as it could as soon as it looked at its strange weapon. It seemed to be surprised and scared, and then turned and ran on its two legs. The Zerithians, bipedal by themselves, dropped down to forelimbs to try and catch it, as they run much faster on four legs than two. It wasn't until they got close that they realized there was another problem. The last four that was in their patrol ran right into long pieces of wire that grabbed them and threw them back. They could hear other types of animals screaming from areas as the Zerithians started thrashing about. These animals appeared to be domesticated and mostly stayed away. However, by the time they had actually gotten away from these metal wires and continued to chase a human, they realized that it was running straight into a domicile. They then immediately got up and ran towards the domicile, screaming at each other, "Hurry, hurry, take it down, quick, hurry, close up, spike it, spike it, spike it," as they screamed in the language that the human clearly didn't know. They saw the human enter the domicile through an opening they didn't realize was there, and then suddenly that same opening slammed shut. They ran up and ran straight into the door and knocked it down. The Zerithians, weighing in excess of 310 pounds apiece, were more than enough to take down the door clean off its hinges. To their fright, when they came in, all they heard was they didn't know what this sound was, but then they saw the human come back down the hall with a much bigger weapon. The sound that reverberated was sheerly deafening to a Zerithian's auditory nerves. But what they were not expecting to see was the head of one of their comrades quite literally explode in the middle of the domicile. With every single one of those thunderous shots, and then another blast. As the Zerithians tried to get close, the human just backed up down its hallway. The Zerithians, being much larger, couldn't quite make it down, and again, every time they heard that, another thunderous clap would end up right behind it, and another one of their number would fall back, missing limbs, tail, or even head. And in one cases, as the last one went in and tried to spike it, the human ran at it, shoved this weapon into its abdomen, and that was the last thing the Zerithian knew as it was blown clean in half. Other patrols found similar acts of violence. Sometimes the humans ran, sometimes they threw things, which surprised them. And they all kept telling each other this was their weapon, this was their weapon. And yet, as they communicated to the other patrols, no, they're using this other weapon. Wait a minute, they're striking at us with sticks. No, they're striking at us with metal. No, they're throwing things at us, and then these things explode. No, they use these strange metal pieces to make sounds that kill us. No, the sounds are constant. What made it even worse is when they realized that their entire invasion had stalled. Their large ship was already en route, and what they did not realize, it had already been noticed. They believed that the humans' weapons were simply anything they could throw, anything they could hit you with, so they figured their ship was safe. It was at this moment they realized they fucked up. As their large assault ships got into high Earth orbit and began to descend rapidly in an attempt to get more of their own kind on the ground, they were accosted by flying metal machines that came out of nowhere. Suddenly, bursts of weapons fire came out, things they didn't even know was happening. Large pieces of metal hit them, then exploded, blowing giant holes in their ship. What was this? They couldn't understand. They had never seen so many different type of weapons. How did they counter it? And before they had a chance to turn the ship back to space and fire the main engines went out. Several of the human weapon systems had struck the engine compartment and fractured it. The coolant system was now leaking far too much, and the emergency safeties forced the engine to shut down. The ships were heading back towards the planet at terminal velocity. This was the first time anyone had ever known that the Zeritians could be beaten even before they made planetfall. Those space battles were not uncommon. It was still uncommon for a primitive species to fight with such voraciousness that an initial invasion would fail so dramatically. It is noted that over 2 dozen large Verithian assault ships crashed around the planet, most of which landed intact as their safety systems came in, and of course, the captains, throwing caution to the wind, activated the engines again to make sure the landing was, at minimally, survivable. However, once on the ground, the Zerithians quickly found out that there was no way they could survive on the ground, and they found out why. Humans, for as soft and squishy as they look, even though it's pretty clear that they have a high amount of muscle mass, are far, far more dangerous than anyone could have ever expected. The reason why we would find out later. That is, after they found their way to space and developed their own FTL travel, is that humans have been fighting amongst themselves for so long and realized that since they don't have any natural weapons, they must develop a weapon system. However, every weapon system has a counter. So you must counter that counter. Stronger weapons, better defenses. Better defenses, stronger weapons. If you can't breach the defenses, you find a way around. All this is something that humans have become absolutely infamous for. This is why, everyone, I recommend highly that given the chance, you never ever cross into human territory. Only one other group has attempted to do so, the Shnakta, a more feline looking species, decided that they would try to take over the planet and feast on its inhabitants. This went about as well as the Chikna, if not even worse, as the humans had begun building their own fleets. Now, they have sent a warning out to the entirety of the galaxy with one simple phrase, 2 simple words: stay away. And we plan on respecting their isolationism, as we do not need them to break any more universal constants. There has only been one other time where a human has actually stumbled into our territory. When that human was brought into the gladiatorial events, it was shown a bunch of weapons and offered a weapon. It simply looked at its captor and said, "Just one?"